Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the love on our most recent short. That's the highest viewed video of ours, thanks to you guys. And you can continue to support us by liking this video and subscribing. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the OBT Podcast to stay updated with us.
Just so everyone knows, we're planning on doing a live stream after the Tuesday games, right? So we've kind of determined that we're probably going to do live streams like after the first games of each series and then the elimination games.
Yeah.
Something like that for those series. So obviously, on Tuesday you have game, I believe, what is it? 5, 4,
Five,
5?
five, yeah.
Yeah, game 5 for Boston, Atlanta. Game 5 for Denver, Minnesota,
Yes.
and I believe also game 5 for Phoenix Clippers. So
Yeah.
after the Phoenix Clipper game, we'll go live, right? And we'll probably, well, not probably, we will discuss, everything that's happened at the
Yeah,
end of those games. And of
for
course,
sure.
the live stream will be on, the channel right after it goes up. So you'll be able to check it out in case you missed it. If you come in, right, you can comment, chat, and we can, discuss. We had a couple of people in the live stream last time that were in the chat, so it was
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's always good vibes. Um, And yeah, to kick this one off, this is another playoffs recap. We're kind of just recapping them every time we record, pretty much. So every game that's happened by in between the times that we've recorded, we're going to be recapping, talking about, and giving our thoughts. So to kick it off, the first game that we had was from Friday, April 21st, and that was Atlanta Hawks versus Boston Celtics. And Atlanta won this game 130 to 122. This was interesting because, in my opinion, I didn't think the Hawks were going to get a single game on Boston. I thought it was going to be a sweep completely. But, Trae Young, he showed up, and he's kind of had a little bit of a bounce back. 32 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds. Pretty solid game from him. DeJounte Murray had 25 points, 5 assists, 6 rebounds. Clint Capella, 10 points, 11 rebounds. DeAndre Hunter, 11 points, 2 rebounds. And then obviously you have some bench guys like Sadiq Bey, 15 points. Bogdanovich, 15 points as well. So, shout out to those guys. They did a really good job playing this game, I thought. And I think the Celtics, they kind of just, with this one, I just don't think they care too much. We're going to talk about it later because there's another Celtics game that we're going to recap. I mean, I think they just know they're going to win this series. So, one game isn't anything to be worried about with this team. We've expressed it multiple times on the podcast. We think the Celtics are light years ahead of this squad, the Hawks, that is. They've got the sixth man of the year. They've got some pretty solid pieces with Tatum and Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, obviously, Marcus Smart. Pretty well-rounded performance from them, but just not enough to get it done against this Hawks team. But, this was a surprise to me, but, what were your thoughts on this one? Because I'm not really sure what to make of it.
Yeah, it was really the second quarter that kind of made the difference for Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
In the first quarter, Boston actually ended the first quarter with a lead, 37-33. But
Okay.
then the second quarter, Atlanta kind of started pulling away, 41-30 in the second quarter. So pretty much, the rest of the way, right? Boston, would kind of get back into the game and tend to make it really close. But Atlanta, just kept on hitting some big shots, right? Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, towards the end of the fourth, hit, a couple of back-breaking threes where
Yeah.
Boston played great defense, right? But they just made, a couple of really tough shots over the defense. Right. And just in general, I kind of figured that Atlanta would probably get one. I just think in general, it's very hard to sweep an NBA team. And, when you have a team that does have some level of talent, which, I do think the Hawks have, even though, again, record wise, it doesn't look like it.
Right.
Um, just in general, I thought Atlanta could get, at least a game. Bench wise, they had some pretty good performances off the bench, like you mentioned. And just in general, right, also the difference was the 3-point shooting, right? Atlanta shot 44%
Yeah.
from three. And even though Boston, made 21 threes, right? Just in general, like, when you have a hot 3-point shooting night, like, it's much easier to win a game, if you can shoot well, right? Especially in a game like this where it was close, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't like, Boston just got blown off the floor,
Exactly.
right? Boston, made it a competitive game. I do think, kind of like what you said, I agree, where it felt like Boston kind of took their foot off the gas this game. It just felt like Atlanta played with a little more desperation, and I think you tend to see that a lot. Um, when a team, is trailing in a series, because obviously they don't want to necessarily go and get swept. So just in general, you kind of figured Atlanta would come out with, some energy. But again, the fact that Boston was able to keep it close, right? And it felt like Atlanta was playing a high level game, right? I think that, like you said, kind of speaks more volumes about it. Boston didn't necessarily go into this game with a ton of focus,
Yeah.
because they know they can beat this team. It's just a matter of, can you do it for, 4 quarters, right? I mean,
Right.
Boston, I feel like, if you have like one really good first quarter, you can probably put the Hawks away, even if they, can kind of keep it close. But, this time Atlanta got it. So, hats off to them. But I don't think it changes the outlook of the series, right?
No, not
But
at all.
obviously, you'd like, if you don't want to get swept, right?
Yeah.
If you're Trey Young or, DeJounte Murray or anyone else for Atlanta, you don't want to necessarily like come out of this series and not having, without having won a single game. I
Yeah.
just think that's a pretty bad look, for a team that we already, think could have a lot of, questions this offseason.
Yeah, I get that. And, not much to say, I think, about that game, because, like we said, I think this series is pretty much done. I think Boston's got it. But nonetheless, great game from Atlanta. They definitely bounced back in that one. And then to move on, this, I think, was probably one of the ugliest games of the playoffs that I think I've seen in a long time. We have the Knicks versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Knicks took this one 99-79. This was rough, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm very scared for our pick of Cleveland because I think
Well, we have to be now.
exactly like they're
Yeah.
on the brink of being eliminated. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but we're
Mhm.
sticking to this game right now.
Yeah.
But good God, like Darius Garland, I'm not gonna lie, he played like he looked like he belonged in the G League, and that's no attack on him. You guys
Right.
know, if you guys have been following the channel, or if you're new, just to reiterate, Darius Garland is my guy. He's great.
I like
Um,
him too.
yeah, love him to death. Pause, but he's a really great player. But I think this is just a situation where it's a young guy, playoffs, first time. He's trying to figure it out. But to get into some statistics, Evan Mobley double double, pretty solid from him. You still want to see more, I think, on the offensive end from him. You kind of want him in that 15-point range, I think. Karis LeVert 17 points, Jared Allen 6 points. Then you have Donovan Mitchell 22. I think this is kind of underwhelming for him. He hasn't performed as well as I would like him to in this series thus far, but it kind of is what it is. He's getting trolled by Knicks fans as we speak. It's pretty rough, but he's got to bounce back, and hopefully they do. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But Darius Garland, 10 points in 33 minutes. That's just not enough on terrible shooting to add to that. Just not a good look. And sorry to start with the losers on this one, but I think this kind of takes precedent because our pick is in jeopardy here. Then you have Chetty Osman, Danny Green, who literally give you nothing. And not to attack these guys, but I'm just stating facts. 0 points in 16 and 12 minutes. Ricky Rubio 0 points as well. Isaac Okoro not too solid, but 7 points. Robin Lopez 4 points, basically garbage time buckets. It's just not a good look. And I don't think this Cleveland team is as strong as we thought. They're just seems like they're just gassed, and I don't know. And I can't tell. I don't think it's coaching. I'm not gonna blame it on the coaching. I think it's just the players just can't hit their shots sometimes, and things look out of sorts. And then to move on to the Knicks, they played a solid game. Jalen Brunson, he's been on fire. And it's to his credit. He's one of I think the better mid-range players in the game right now. He's phenomenal in the 2-point range. I think his three could probably use a little bit of more, work, but I really like his game overall. He finished with 21 points. RJ Barrett 19. That's huge for him. I think that's the range that you want if you want him to, or if you want to be able to move on as a team in the Knicks. You want to see a little bit more from Julius Randle. He had 11 points, 8 rebounds. I'm not gonna say I would have expected that from Julius Randle because I think he's a really good player, but you need to see a little bit more, especially for the minutes that he plays and the caliber player that he is. You can't have him having the same amount of points as your sixth man in Emmanuel quickly, but that's just my opinion. Then you move on down. You got Josh Hart, 13 points, solid guy off the bench. Manuel Quickley, like I said, 11 points. Then you have Isaiah Hartenstein, who's been a really, I think, pivotal bench rotational guy for the Knicks. He comes in and, brings some energy off the bench that you need, especially come playoff time. So, shout out to him, 7 points, 5 rebounds, 18 minutes. Solid, impact. And then, like stats wise, I mean, this Cleveland team, they shot 38% from the, field, 21% from the three. That's just not going to cut it, at any level. So, what were your thoughts on this one? Because, like I said, I think, our pick is in grave jeopardy of being completely wrong. And,
I
I
mean,
think a lot of people are in the same boat. So,
yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I do think, kind of like, I basically agree with you. I think that this series we were definitely way off on. And we'll get into more of you know, the series when we get into Game 4, I guess. But
mm-hmm.
um, I think the main issue, you know, with this series going on is that, we kind of talked about it going into the playoffs where Cleveland, the problem with them was, that where they were probably going to get, hurt in the playoffs was the lack of wings. And, we didn't necessarily think that it was going to hurt them against New York, right? Because when you look at New York, really their only real option at the wing is RJ Barrett. Josh Hart kind of plays the role of a wing a little bit, right? But
Right.
he's like, 6'4", 6'5". So kind of the X factor for the Knicks was RJ Barrett, right? But, if you look at this game, and we'll get into it next game, right? But he's played much better. Like you mentioned, 19 points, 8
Mm-hmm.
rebounds, right? So when he's, getting it going on offense, the Cavs don't really have anybody that's really capable of doing a whole lot with him,
Yeah.
right? In this game, game 3, right? They started Karis LeVert, and obviously he played well. He played fine,
Right.
right? Didn't shoot that well, right? No, but nobody for Cleveland really shot that well. But just in general, he's more of a guard. He's not really a forward,
Yeah.
wing. He's more of a guard. Right. Darius Garland struggled, right? And that's, kind of something like you mentioned, right? Where it's the playoffs, right? It's his first time. So obviously, he's going to have some up and down performances. And it's kind of like a battle, right? To kind of figure out, the right amount of time that the ball should be in his hands versus Mitchell's hands. But
Yeah.
I really think it's that wing issue. Combined with the bench, they're just not getting anything from the guys off the bench. Whereas if you look at the Knicks, right? I mean, Julius Randle didn't have a good game, right? But you still had Obi Toppin, right? You have Hartenstein, right? Even McBride sometimes comes in there,
Yeah.
and gives them good minutes. Obviously, Josh Harten quickly, and I think that's kind of the difference, right? So for me, like with this series, I thought Cleveland would win just because I didn't feel like the RJ Barrett piece was going to hurt them as much, um, with the wings, but it clearly has. I think that's kind of been the big difference in the series is it's him, combined with a couple of the guys off the Knicks bench.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just been ugly for Cleveland. I mean, 79 points, through 4 quarters, right? That's really awful. I mean, so
Yeah.
that means right, and I think they had 24 in the fourth quarter. So I mean, you're talking about going into the fourth quarter, they only had like 50 something points, right? That's
Yeah.
just not going to get it
That's pretty
done
rough.
in a playoff game. So I mean, I think we were definitely wrong about Cleveland. We did give the Knicks a chance to win the series, even though
Yeah.
we did pick Cleveland to win. It wasn't like a scenario where we thought Cleveland was like demonstrably, obviously better than the Knicks.
Yeah.
But
We said it was going to be
I'm not
close.
gonna lie, I'm coming in, I'm coming out of this game kind of disappointed because it does feel like Cleveland should be better. But I do
Mm-hmm.
think the lack of that wing, did hurt them. It hurt them a lot earlier, I think, than we thought because R.J. Barrett, right, is one tier of guy, right? But then, if you moved on to the next series, right, you got to battle Middleton and Giannis, or maybe Tatum and Brown, right? And though that's another level of wing, but
Yeah.
you know, but that's kind of the issue, right? When you don't have any of those guys, and then also like they don't have a backup big either, right? And
Right.
like, it doesn't feel like, you would, that they would necessarily have to have one considering they start two bigs. But yeah, when they're off the floor and it's just one of them, not having another wing means it's a lot harder to get rebounds, right? So you're going kind of small, right? And the Knicks can kind of just, battle for second chance points. So I think that's kind of the issue, right? No backup big, no real wing options, no production off the bench. And I think
Right.
that's kind of the difference here, because there was always a path for the Knicks to win the series. I just didn't
Yeah.
necessarily know if I saw that happening because I just wasn't sure about RJ Barrett and whether or not he could, you know, do this. But he definitely has, and that's been really the key difference, I think, because
Yeah.
Cavs don't have an answer for him when he's getting it going.
Yeah. And like you said, like, I think it's really funny, or not funny, but, interesting that this is happening so early. Like their collapse is really early, in my opinion. Um, if the Cavs were to collapse, I would have thought it would have been around game 6, game 7. But I think this is a telltale sign that if you're a Cavs fan or if you're rooting for these guys in any way, shape, or form, you need to be scared. And to move on into our next game, this one was an interesting one. We had Denver at Minnesota. Denver came away 120 to 111. And, we got to shout out Jokic, triple double in 38 minutes, 20 points, 12 assists, 11 rebounds. Then you have Michael Porter Jr., who's looked really good. I think he's looked a lot better than I personally thought he was going to look. He put up 25 points, 9 rebounds. And it seems like Minnesota just has no answer for him, which is understandable. He's kind of like a baby unicorn. Like, he has potential to be one of a kind, but, his ceiling's so high, but I feel like he still has a decent amount of work to do to get there. But he has a lot of potential, and we're seeing the flashes right now. And then obviously Jamal Murray, 18 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds, cooled off a little bit from his last performance, but nonetheless still a solid one. I'd still like to see a little bit more, like I said, but you can only do so much when you've been through so many injuries and the things that he's been through in his career, young career. Then you have Caldwell Pope, 14 points, really good outing from him. This is the kind of points that you want from your supporting cast, especially when Jokic isn't on the floor. I think this is a good sign. And then Bruce Brown Jr., obviously 12 points. Jeff Green, 8 points as well. And then to move on to Minnesota, this is very interesting because I think they hit on everything that they needed to except for the defense. Anthony Edwards had a phenomenal game, 36 points in 44 minutes, 5 assists, 7 rebounds, great game. Towns bounced back a little bit, 27 points, 1 assist, 7 rebounds. Gobert had a pretty decent game, 18 points, 10 rebounds, but the key is they just can't defend. And it seems like they struggle defending Jokic and, like I said, the Michael Porter Jr. It just doesn't look like they have a huge answer for them, and that's probably going to cost them. We'll talk about it later once we know the outcome of the final game, or game 4, excuse me. But, right now Denver's up 3-0, so they're in danger of getting swept. And this is just not good because, if you look at the stats for this game, it's kind of ugly on Minnesota's end. They didn't even shoot 50% as a team from the field this game, and I don't know. It's just such a weird team. I thought that they were my dark horse, so going into this, I thought they had a chance, but now it doesn't look like it. The momentum's kind of shifted away from them, but I think, if you're Minnesota, I think things are going to probably be on the up and up for you just because, Anthony Edwards is showing that he's a big-time player who makes big-time plays. He's stepping up in the playoff moments, but, I think it's more of a team thing, so they've got to get some other guys that can help that squad be more solidified and fulfilled. But, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I just think it kind of goes to continue to show that Gobert trade just was not the right move for Minnesota. I mean,
Right.
again, when you look at the numbers, right, just the raw numbers, it doesn't look like either of them, had a bad game, right? I mean, you look at Gobert, like you mentioned, 18 points, 10 rebounds, even though he fouled out.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Towns, 27 and 7. But like you said, the defense has been an issue. Right, they just have stretches where whenever they turn the ball over, their transition defense is pretty awful, right? Which makes sense, right? Because when you have 2 big 7-footers out there, it's pretty hard for them to be able to get back on defense. And Denver can kind of just run them out of the gym at times.
Yeah.
Like you said, right, Jokic, even though he hasn't had an insane 40-point game, right? It's pretty clear they just have no answer for him offensively, right?
Yeah.
Despite them having 2 big 7-footers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our X factors for Denver, right? Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. Both of those guys have played really well in this series.
Yes.
Um, right, and Denver, the main thing for them that's been pretty impressive is that their defense has been a lot better. Right, because there was a stretch where their defense was pretty solid, right, and then when they had that long stretch, right, towards the end of the regular season where you kind of wondered whether or not they had taken their foot off the gas or were
Mm-hmm.
they just maybe not as good as we thought. Right, the defense has definitely stepped up once again. I think they're they're basically running like a 8-man rotation, right? Because you have your starters playing big minutes, right? Then you got Jeff Green, Bruce Brown, and Christian Brown, right?
Hmm.
And those guys, off the bench, they do a pretty solid job. It feels like Denver's rotation is still really, thin, right? Because I don't know over the course of a 7-game series how much you can really rely on just those three guys coming off the bench. I
Right.
like some of the lineups that they run where they got Aaron Gordon, kind of like as a small ball center when Jokic isn't out there, right? Because they don't really have any other great options as backup centers, right? DeAndre Jordan, right, isn't really going to do anything for you
Right.
at this point, right? And Thomas Bryant, even though he was good in the regular season for the Lakers, he hadn't really played at all since coming into Denver,
Hmm.
right? His minutes dropped off, and I guess they just don't trust him defensively, which has been a problem for him. So it's just as long as Denver can defend, right? They'll be able to survive like the non-Jokic minutes if they can defend because they do
Yeah.
have other guys that can score. It's just going to be interesting, right? Because I do think that the series is over. I don't necessarily know 100% if they win Game 4, right? But Minnesota's not coming back, right, from 3-0, obviously. So
Yeah.
I guess the key for Denver, right, is can you keep this momentum going? Because again, this is a team where even though they're the number one seed, right? It doesn't feel like a lot of people feel like or believe they can come out of the West,
Right.
just because the path is kind of tough, right? Because you're probably going to have to play Phoenix um, in the second round, and obviously that's not an easy matchup. But still, right? This is what you want to see. If you believe Denver can make a championship run, right? You want to see them, pretty much kind of skate through the first round, right, in the 1-8 matchup, right, where even though a couple of the games have been close, right, it's still up 3-0. They're still up 3-0. So, for them, you kind of hope that, right, the switch is flipped so, so that way what you saw towards the end of the regular season wasn't legit. Right, you want to see Jamal Murray playing well. And, that's kind of the key, right? Because that's the X factor for Denver is Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. If those guys are, playing at a high level, that significantly raises Denver's ceiling because we know
Hmm.
Jokic is great. Right, but the other guys have to play really well if Denver wants a chance to come out of the West. If they do that, right, clearly they can defend fine. I think there's going to be some teams where it's going to be a problem, right? Maybe not so much against Minnesota, but I think, against a team, right, that has, more dangerous guards, right? So say like maybe like a Golden State or maybe like a Phoenix or somebody like that,
Hmm.
right? It might be a little bit tougher, right? But this team is good, right? I think that's kind of the question that a lot of people had was whether or not they were a really legit team. But I think this team has answered. This team is really good, and they should be taken seriously as a legit contender.
Yeah. I have.
As for
Yeah.
Minnesota, oh sorry,
No. No.
were
No.
you?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then as for Minnesota, like I said, I think it's just kind of further proof the Gobert trade was just a disaster. I mean, yeah, I mean they made the playoffs, but like, I mean, still, right? That's not really an improvement from where they were
Mm-mm.
last year. They were the seventh seed last year. Looked like they had a lot of promise, right? And then they just mess it up with that move. And I just kind of wonder, what happens from here, right? Towns has had a few bad games, right? Gobert, has been mediocre in my opinion. Edwards has been really good,
Hmm.
right? So I think that kind of just goes to show, right, that even though he was really bad in the play-in game against the Lakers, it's pretty clear Edwards is the future, and I think
Hmm.
that's the guy you need to build around if you're Minnesota.
Yeah.
That's the guy you need to kind of figure out how to maximize. So I do kind of wonder, like, what they do. Obviously, you can still use the excuse of, right, well, we lost McDaniels, right, and he was a key factor for us, so we can still be a decent team. But
Hmm.
I don't know. That's a lot of pieces to give up, for just a first round exit, in my opinion. So I just kind of wonder what Minnesota does in the offseason. I don't necessarily think that they have to blow it up. Um, but I do think that they kind of need to think about the direction of where this team is headed because it's pretty clear that, with the new GM and new ownership, the first big move that they made was clearly a bad one. Right. That, like I said, is I think at this point bordering on one of the worst all time trades ever.
It might be
So
the worst.
yeah, I'd have to look back, I mean, obviously that Brooklyn Boston one was pretty bad.
Yeah.
And there's some other ones that I think, if you go back to like previous eras where, the league was run differently, there
Oh
were some
yeah.
pretty bad ones.
Yeah.
But just in general, like it's just not a great look. Um, and it sucks, right? Because this was a team that had a lot of potential coming into the season, before they made the move. And again, I'm not going to put it all on Gobert, right? But just in general, I just think the decision, it's kind of like the Westbrook thing, right? For LA. I don't look at the person as being the reason. I think the decision to make the trade to acquire that person when you knew that the fit was kind of clunky, right? Because we knew the Gobert fit was clunky.
Yeah.
And I know that there were people that thought like it would help Minnesota in the regular season, but I'm just like, I just don't see it. And like the
Yeah.
more that I continue to watch it, especially this series against, a team like Denver, right? And it's not like I mean Denver's a really good team, but I mean it's not like they're a juggernaut. And just watching, Minnesota just constantly just getting blitzed by Denver, just it just kind of makes it feel like, yeah, this was, a bad move. I like the Mike Conley move, right? But
Right.
and that's kind of I guess a positive. But then you also look at his age. He's an older player, right? I believe he's what 35, 36.
Something like that.
So yeah, so
He's
I
been
mean,
around.
exactly. He's been around, so obviously he's not a long-term piece, right? He may not have too many high-level years left. So I don't know what Minnesota does, but obviously we can get into that as teams get eliminated. But
Yeah.
overall, like I said, congrats to Denver because it looks like they've wrapped up this series, right? And obviously you want as much rest as you can, right? Because they're probably going to go against Phoenix.
Yeah. So to move on, we've got our first elimination game,
Yep.
or first eliminated team, and that was Brooklyn. They got eliminated by the 76ers, 96-88. Philly takes the win without the league's MVP. It's not my MVP, but it's the league's. So, yeah, Joel Embiid, he did not play. But the supporting cast, they came through, pulled out the W. Solid performance from Tobias Harris. And I think that's one guy. When he gets to his spots, I think he's pretty solid. I just don't know, how well he fits with Embiid, in my opinion. But that might be a discussion for another day. But he did have 25 points, 12 rebounds. He was their leading scorer. Then you get into some other guys, James Harden, 17 points, 11 assists, 8 rebounds. Pretty solid performance. Still like to see a little bit more from him on the scoring end, especially without Embiid. You would think he would have exploded a little bit more, but, age, injuries, all that stuff, that's all a factor. Tyrese Maxey, 16 points, 8 rebounds, solid performance. Again, I'd kind of want to see more from him. But I just feel like this Philly team just completely dog walked this Brooklyn Nets team. Like, they had them on the leash the entire time. But, DeAnthony Melton, 15 points. So, this Philly team, I'm not impressed with this, to be honest, because, I'm not too high on the 76ers. I think there's, two more teams that are a little bit better than them. Not going to name them right now, but, with Brooklyn, I think their future is bright. That's all I could say about this team. Their future is bright. I'm curious to see what they do in the future. But, hats off to them for even trying and even getting here in the first place. I know their record was kind of built off of, the work of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But nonetheless, they were able to still be in the playoffs and have a decent seeding. But, shout out to Philly for moving on, and they handled this swiftly in a sweep. So 4-0. What were your thoughts on this? Because, I mean, for me, there's not really much to say, but, both these teams, in my opinion, shot really bad. But,
Yeah, I mean, Philly did what they had to do.
Yeah.
Right, it wasn't pretty, right? But ultimately, they got the win. Harden, obviously, you still have some concerns about his finishing around the basket. He did a good job in terms of getting guys involved. Made a couple of solid plays defensively. Right, Tyrese Maxey, right, had stretches, right, where he was able to kind of, score some timely buckets, right? Because Philly spent a chunk of the game, trailing, right? Because I think they were trailing by 7 at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the first quarter, right? And I think at halftime they were still trailing, right, by like 5, 6 points.
Yeah.
Right. But then the third quarter, right, the second half was where Philly, ultimately kind of, pulled it out. Right, like you mentioned, Tobias Harris had a great game. That was kind of one of the guys that you kind of were looking, that you were kind of looking for, in terms of an elevated performance, right, without Joel Embiid, and he
Right.
definitely did that, right, leading the team in scoring, right, had 12 rebounds, right, great efficiency, right,
Mm-hmm.
kind of taking advantage of some of the mismatches, right, because Brooklyn, other than Claxton, it's a relatively small team, even though they do have a lot of wings.
Right.
Um, Paul Reed, I thought did a great
Oh,
job
yeah.
filling in for Joel
Shout out
Embiid.
him.
10
I
points,
forgot about
15
him.
rebounds. Yeah, B-ball Paul, 10 points, 15 rebounds, steal, a block, 2 assists. Right, just did a great job of just playing hard, competing,
Yeah.
battling for extra possessions. Right, and also clearing defensive possessions. D'Anthony Melton in the fourth quarter did a really good job. On both ends of the floor. Like you mentioned, right, Philly. I think like even though they did get the sweep, it didn't like you said, it didn't necessarily feel all that impressive. Obviously, hats off to them being able to get a win without Joel Embiid,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's never easy to do. win a elimination game, without your best player, even against a team like Brooklyn that, again, as I continue to mention, after the trade deadline, they had a below 500 record. So, I like you kind of, alluded to, right? Durant and Kyrie, they were kind of the ones that kind of helped Brooklyn, stay in playoff
Yeah.
position. Um, because they were doing pretty well before the trade.
Right.
Right. But obviously, like you said, you still got to give credit to Brooklyn for making it that far. Right. You got some good performances from some guys, right? Claxton took advantage without Joel Embiid.
Right.
Right. Dinwiddie had a solid game. Right. Bridges obviously struggled in terms of efficiency, right? I think it's kind of clear, right? His game dropped off a little bit, right, as the number one guy in the playoffs, right? But like you said, Brooklyn still has some solid options. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the offseason.
Yes.
Obviously they got some guys that are going to be free agents. A couple of the guys are a little bit older, right? Like Seth Curry. I think Patty Mills might be a free agent, but I'm not sure.
I think so.
Yeah, Royce O'Neal, maybe, I think.
Maybe.
So they have some guys, right, that it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they bring back. Maybe they make some moves in terms of trades in the offseason, right? Maybe that's a potential Trey Young candidate. I don't know. But
Good point. Yeah.
just in general, I do kind of wonder, what this series is going to look like because we've had a number of, injuries in the first round so far, right? And Doc Rivers kind of said Embiid is like has a 50-50 shot of, starting in the second round.
Right.
So that's not necessarily like, that doesn't give me great confidence.
No.
I guess it's better than a 0% chance, right? But I'm assuming they're probably going to play Boston, right? Obviously, because Boston lost that one game against Atlanta, right? They got to wait a little bit before they can play Philly,
Yes.
right? But again, you need to be pretty much at 100% if they, want to try to beat Boston, right? Because if he's not, healthy, they don't have any chance, right? Because you just got you right because you have to worry about Tatum and Brown, and always, and especially against Philly, right? Because PJ Tucker, Tobias Harris doesn't feel like they're great matchups against those two guys, right?
Right.
But obviously they're competitors, but still. But yeah, just in general, right? Brooklyn got swept. There weren't, they had a couple of games where they played pretty awful, but for most of the series, right, they made it a game.
Yeah. For
Right, but
sure.
this was a problem that we said, like that without Durant and Kyrie, they were gonna struggle, to close out games because they
Yeah.
don't have like a natural go-to scorer, right? Again, Bridges, I thought did a pretty good job in the regular season, but he dropped off a little bit, efficiency wise, right? Come playoff time, which makes sense, right? So obviously he can continue to get better because he's obviously shown that he's really, really good. Right. And obviously, maybe they make some trades. Obviously, with the Harden trade, when they got him from Houston, they don't have a whole lot of flexibility in terms of picks,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they do have some contracts that maybe they can move. So I do kind of wonder where they go from here, right? And this is kind of interesting, right? Because this is our first, like you said, our first elimination, our first team getting eliminated. Right. So obviously we're gonna have, a few other teams, right, on the way over the next, week or so, right, as
Yeah.
some of these series continue to get wrapped up. But still, we give credit to Brooklyn, right? They played hard. Ultimately they just didn't have enough, to match up with Philly. And that was kind of the reason why I thought this was gonna be a quick series anyways, and it pretty much was, right? I mean, the scores don't indicate, right, you know, how well or poorly Philly played because I thought Philly didn't necessarily look great in a lot of these games. But
Yeah.
again,
You're right.
they did what they needed to do against Brooklyn. So now they have the chance to go up against Boston with a chance to potentially redeem themselves. Since since Boston has typically been a matchup that they just haven't fared well against, right? And
Yes.
obviously you also have to factor in the Embiid injury. So we'll see where this goes.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, but we do have to shout those guys out for being the first team to move on officially to the second round. Um, but to move on, and we're heading into the West now.
Yep.
We've got Phoenix Suns versus Los Angeles Clippers. The Suns took the win 112-100. Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, they put the team on their back. They combined for 61 points. KD had 31 points, 6 rebounds, or 6 assists, 11 rebounds, excuse me. And then Booker, he had 30 points, 7 assists, 9 rebounds. DeAndre Ayton had 15 points, 13 rebounds. Then Chris Paul, 19 points, 9 assists, 4 rebounds, and an ankle breaker. So, shout out this squad. This is my pick to go to the finals, but I do have some concerns with this team because it seems like they don't, officially turn it on until like the fourth quarter. It's so weird, but, and like I feel like they have an identity crisis going on here. It seems like they don't necessarily know who's the number one guy at times. Like it seems like Durant is kind of a little bit too unselfish. There's a lot of shots that
Yeah.
he would normally take, if he was the undisputed number one guy on a squad, So like, but he'll pass out of it or it'll be a turnover or something. But I do like that Durant and Ayton combo. I feel like that's a really underrated combo because it seems like the Clippers, they'll automatically double Durant no matter what if he's in the mid range. And then it'll normally be the big man, so it would be somebody like Zubac or something like that, Plumlee even. Um, and then Ayton's kind of just right there in the lane waiting for the ball, and then Durant will normally get it to him. And then it's easy buckets for him. So I really like that combo. But like I said, I'm somewhat impressed, but I'm also nervous just due to the fact that these starters play some ridiculous minutes. And it's against a bruised and battered Clippers team. They have no Kawhi or anything. Well, they do have one guy, and that's Russell Westbrook. And with Russ, he's turning back the clock. He put up 37 points, 4 assists, 6 rebounds. Like I said, he's turning back the clock. This is some like retro OKC Russ that we're witnessing right now. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough to get it done. What were your thoughts first on Westbrook, and then secondly on the game in general?
Yeah, I mean, the turnaround for him has been, incredible to see. We talked about it when the move happened. We didn't necessarily think it was going to work, but we did expect that the fit was going to be better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think our thought process was, we don't see the Clippers probably still being able to win a title,
Right.
but that the fit for the Clippers would work better than the fit for the Lakers, and it definitely has. I
Yes.
think kind of a part, an underrated or under talked about or under
Mm-hmm.
discussed thing about this is his 3-point shooting has been, like a lot better than he normally would,
Yeah.
perform. I mean, he shot 50% on threes in this game, 3 of 6,
Yeah.
right? For the playoffs, he's typically been much lower than that.
Yes.
But just in general, right, with the spacing that, some of the guys of the Clippers provides, it does give him better opportunities around the basket. So that's obviously good,
Right.
for him. Um, but this is great, if you're if you believe that Westbrook still has basketball left, right? Because that's how I always felt. There were some people, that I had heard covering, the NBA that thought he might just be out of the league,
Yeah.
once the Lakers got rid of him. Um, when everybody was talking about it in the offseason. And I never thought that because I thought he could still play. I just didn't think he fit with the Lakers. And he's definitely been a much better fit for the Clippers. Obviously, I think he's played himself into a scenario where he's going to get, some more money this offseason, right? He's shown he can still be a big factor for a team. Again, obviously, the stakes are a little bit different.
Right.
Right. No Paul George, no Kawhi, so way more opportunities to have the ball in his hands. Right. But still, you got to take advantage of the opportunities you're given. So that's huge for them.
Yeah.
Um, just in general, right? Like, this series, it just kind of sucks, the injuries. Because, again, like, Phoenix, obviously they're up 3-1, right?
Yes.
Obviously, they won this game by 12 points. But like you said, it's just kind of concerning just that the Clippers are without Kawhi and Paul George, right? So they're without their 2 best players. And the Clippers have basically been in both games down to the wire. They've even had
Pretty
leads at
much.
different
Yeah.
points. Um, Right, and then you look at the guys playing for the Clippers, right? And it's like Westbrook, Eric Gordon, Norman Powell, Zubac, right? Marcus Morris, right? Nick Batum, who hasn't really done anything, right? Covington, right? Bones, Highland, Plumlee. It just doesn't feel like that this should be a close, that these games shouldn't be close, right? But like you said, Phoenix is playing high minutes, right? Obviously, late in the game, right? I think is kind of where it's a wrap, right? Because Phoenix's shot making,
Yeah.
is significantly better than the Clippers, especially without Kawhi and Paul George, right? Chris
Yes.
Paul, right, had stretches, right, late in the game where he was much better, right? He's a guy that's kind of like an X factor for them, considering he's had some struggles in some of these games, right? Booker's been great,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just to watch him also, have really strong defensive performances, I think is really cool. Just because you normally look at him as a scorer, and he's had flashes where his defense has been good, right? But with Durant, it feels like his defense has kind of been elevated, and it needs to be, right? Because that backcourt, isn't necessarily like your typical defensive minded backcourt,
Yeah.
right? With Chris Paul, who was a rugged defender for most of his career, but obviously he's not as effective anymore since he's
Yeah.
older. Right, Aiton I think has done a good job, right, around the basket on both ends of the floor. Torrey Craig has been kind of like an unsung hero, right? He was inserted into the starting lineup. That was the guy that I initially thought when they made the Durant trade was going to be elevated as a starter, but initially it was a Kogi. But I think the Craig thing has worked out for them. And obviously Durant, right? Like it's kind of funny with him where he had, for a good chunk of the first half, it didn't really feel like he was playing that well, but then he still finished the game with 31 points, 11 rebounds, right?
Yeah.
9 to 17. So obviously, right? Like they're up 3-1. So you got to take that, right? They're probably going to play well, not probably. They will play Denver in the second round and it'll be interesting to see how they match up against Denver since that's a completely different team from the Clippers and they're healthy.
Yes.
I just do kind of wonder how this series would have looked, right, if Kawhi Leonard, just didn't miss, these last two games and if Paul George was available because I do feel like, you might give the edge to the Clippers because of the depth that they have, right? But, unfortunately, this is kind of what you have to factor in with Kawhi and Paul George because these are two guys that tend to miss a lot of time. Obviously, with Kawhi, you have the scenario where he, goes through the load management, but then he's still not available for playoff
Yeah.
games. And so I just don't know what this Clippers team does in the offseason because again, this is I think their fourth year together.
I think
If I'm
so.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And, you look at the success that they've had, right? The first year they beat Dallas in the first round and then blow the 3-1 lead and just collapse against Denver, right? Then the following year they go to the conference finals, right, against the Suns, but Kawhi's hurt, right? So
Yep.
then they, don't win there, right? If he was healthy, maybe they go to the finals. And then last year, right, they were in the play-in, right? And then they got eliminated, right? Because they lost to the Timberwolves, and then Paul George gets COVID and misses the last play-in game against the Pelicans.
Yeah.
And then of course you have this year, right, where they were kind of up and down for most of the year, right? Get Westbrook, it starts to look like things have been figured out, and then Paul George and Kawhi are hurt again. So I just don't know what this team does going forward, right? I think this series is pretty much over. Maybe
Yeah.
if Kawhi comes back, maybe he can give them another game, but I just have no confidence that either of these guys will be back. Well, I know George isn't coming back, but I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't have much confidence that Kawhi is going to be back. And even if he is, I mean, you're down 3-1.
Yeah.
So that's probably a wraps for this one. So I just wonder what the Clippers do this offseason because, again, it's been 4 seasons together with this group and it hasn't really amounted to anything. Right, Oklahoma City, right? Those picks, are kind of looking nice right now, right? They got Shea. I
Hmm.
think Jalen Williams was there as a result of the Clippers pick going to
I
Oklahoma
I think
City.
so. Yeah.
And then yeah, exactly. And there's other picks on the way. Obviously, at the time you do the move, right? Because you were getting Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, but it's starting to feel like now that that move, may just go down as like just a blunder, just because again they haven't had anything to show for it. And I just kind of wonder where they go from here, because
Yeah.
again, I think there's a lot of guys where I wonder if they're back next season, right? Because Batum was really good, the last couple of seasons, but he didn't do anything for them in this series.
No.
Um, right? And he's only getting older, right? Gordon was okay, right? But again, obviously, in a vacuum, right? If you had Kawhi and Paul George, maybe they're better. But I just don't know. I just think
Yeah.
that this team has a lot of questions, and I do kind of wonder where they go. But obviously, if you're Phoenix, right, you're happy, right? Because you're out. You're probably going to come out of the series relatively healthy, right? Going against the number one seed in Denver, right, where you're not going to have home court. But obviously, I think they're going to have the best player on the floor in Durant, right? Or I guess you could argue maybe it's even between those two guys, right? But obviously, Durant's incredible. And then you have Booker, so they have enough, I think, to beat Denver, who's not exactly deep either. But I think that's going to be an interesting series to watch. Just given the two different styles of play by both teams. And I think that both teams can kind of exploit some of the weaknesses of the other teams. But hopefully that's a good series because I think we
Yeah.
can pretty much say that because I think this series is done.
Yeah.
And I think the Denver Minnesota series is done. Even
Yeah.
if they don't close it out next game, I think it's done.
Yeah.
Especially
I
if
think
Kawhi
both of
doesn't
those
come back.
teams are gonna move on for sure. Both of them
Yeah.
are definitely gonna be moving on. Um. You want to take the Bucks Heat one? You want to kick it off?
Yeah. So obviously, we go to Bucks Heat game 3, right? First off, I want to say prayers out to Victor Oladipo, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he got hurt towards the end of the game. Um he just slipped and fell, and everybody in the arena, you could tell, right, based off the reactions, it wasn't good, and it was reported, today that he had a torn patellar tendon in his knee, so his season is done.
Yeah.
So that probably means he's gonna have another surgery. Just brutal for him, right? He worked his way back onto the floor. He's just battled a lot of injuries the last few years after,
Yeah.
kind of morphing into a star for Indiana, and it just hasn't worked since.
Yeah.
So I just kind of want to just say that first, right? Because I saw it live and it was pretty rough. It was pretty brutal to see, and you felt bad, right? Because he seems like a nice guy, and he was really good for Indiana.
Right.
But it just sucks how his career has kind of gone since then because he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And he was an impact player, at times
Hmm.
in this game particularly, right? Considering they're already shorthanded anyways. I just wanted to start off with that. But if you want, you can say something about that. But once if not, I'm just gonna get into the game.
Um, you know, shout out Oladipo for me because he's from my area. So it just pains me to see a player go down like that. I never want to see that. Unfortunately, I didn't get to watch this game. I was watching the Ryan Garcia Tank Davis fight. If you watch that, let us know in the comments. But prayers out to Oladipo. That's all I can really say. I didn't see the injury, and I honestly don't want to because, I mean, I'm sure I'm not going to say it's a tearjerker, obviously, but I'm sure it's painful to watch. But I'm hoping and praying that his career can continue, and hopefully maybe get back to that level that he was hooping at in Indiana. But once again, just prayers for that. But yeah, I didn't really watch this game, so you probably won't hear a lot of thoughts from me. I can only judge it off the box score, to be honest.
Yeah, so I got it. So
Yeah, yeah.
obviously, the Heat take a 2-1 lead, right? Which I think, going into this series felt pretty improbable given, you know, what Miami looked like, right, in that first playing game against the Hawks. And then, they responded well against the Bulls, right? But it just didn't feel like that this team really had any real mojo to it. Obviously, right, the course of the series changes, right, with Giannis being hurt. And I'm starting to get kind of concerned, right? Because after game one, it was, kind of suggested that there was a decent level of optimism that he would play in game two.
Right.
And then I think he was upgraded to questionable. Then they sat him, he didn't play, and they still won, right? They blew out the Heat game two. And then game three, right? He's out again, except this time Miami blows out Milwaukee. Um, and this is kind of concern time, right? I mean, obviously you had some guys, right? Drew Holiday, played well in the first half. Middleton looked really good, right? So obviously that's been a good sign. He's been pretty good this series, right? And that was kind of a question. That was kind of one of the things that I said this series, right? Is that this is kind of Middleton's get right series where
Right.
he can kind of reestablish himself because he needs to play at a high level if the Bucks want to win the title. Um, right? They were my pick to win the title, but obviously we'll start with the winning team, I guess. A little, get more into them.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler was great, 30 points, 4 assists, 5 rebounds, really set the tone of the game. 4 from three, right? Just, for whatever reason, his game seems to be elevated come playoff time. Bam didn't really give you a whole lot offensively, right? But battled on the boards, right? Still have made some solid playmaking decisions. Right, Love was inserted into the starting lineup, 2 of 6, right, but 6.7 rebounds, still overall a net positive for the Heat. Right, Vincent didn't give you a whole lot, really, other than Butler. Right, the key for Miami was the bench. Right, Duncan Robinson just now with Tyler Hero out, he's kind of been relied on a lot more. He's kind of reestablished himself. 20 points on 9 shots, 5 of 6 from three, 7 of 9 from the field. Right,
Hmm.
that was key because he just was he was just bombing threes left and right. Caleb Martin for the Heat, right? 12 points, 11 rebounds, crashed the offensive glass, right? They had 8 offensive rebounds. Kind of I guess matched Milwaukee's, right? But you don't really look at Miami as really competing rebounding wise. They generally haven't been great rebounding the ball this year.
Yeah.
Lowry off the bench gave them some really good minutes, right? He's played pretty well. Right, plus 27 on the night. Oladipo, right before his injury, right, he gave them some pretty solid minutes. But in general, right, like that's kind of what the Heat needed, right? Without Tyler Hero in this series, you kind of need some other guys to come in and step up, right? And obviously, the other equalizer, right, is no Giannis, right? Giannis has been out. We don't know when he's coming back, um, right? And again, you had some decent performances from some guys, like I mentioned, Middleton was good. Holiday in the first half was good, right? The main thing was in the second half, Milwaukee's shooting cooled off.
Yeah.
Miami's shooting for most of the game was, terrific. I mean, 16 of 33 from three, right? So almost 50%, which is ridiculous. 54 from the field. So that's kind of the main difference there. Milwaukee also just had a lot of like ridiculous turnovers. Um, in the second half. I mean, like, the final box score, right? The stats look kind of, a little inflated, I guess, because of, the garbage time, right? But
Right.
just in general, like I said, it's kind of concern time for Milwaukee, right? Because Giannis is out. We still don't know when he's coming back. You're down 2-1. Obviously they can still win this series, right? But the what you don't want to happen is, he comes back, right? But maybe he's, kind of hobbled. And then Miami somehow takes game three, or excuse me, game four, and they're up 3-1.
Oof.
And that might effectively end the series, which would be a shocker, right? Going into the series, right? The fact that Miami has been able to win 2 games is pretty remarkable. But again, you still have to factor in, no Giannis. So I just kind of wonder, right? Does Giannis play
Yeah.
the next game? Because I think he kind of has to play, right? Because I mean, I guess when you look at the body of work, right? Milwaukee lost the first game when he only played 11 minutes. And then they, had to get back in game two, but then they got blown out in this game, right? So
Mm-hmm.
really, without Giannis, they're basically, 1-2. Even though, I mean, I don't really count the 11 minutes he played in game one. They were trailing
Yeah.
anyways when he was out there.
Exactly.
So I mean, so that's kind of the key here is I think Giannis kind of needs to come back. I mean, I don't know if, it's a situation where maybe they just feel like they can survive, and they're just trying to give him a little bit more rest. But if he's available to play, I think he kind of needs to come back because, if you're Milwaukee, like I said, the last thing you want is a scenario where, you know, Miami takes another game and you're down 3-1. And I mean, well, I think Milwaukee could do that, with the healthy Giannis. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation like that. So, even though I'm not giving up on Milwaukee because I think Giannis will come back, but it is concerning because it seemed like there was a high level of optimism going into, game two that he would play, but he hasn't played since the first game. And so clearly that injury is more serious than they're letting on. So
Yeah.
if he just doesn't come back, or if he doesn't, come back until, like game five or something like that, this could get really scary for Milwaukee, right? And because I mean, you don't want to go out in the first round, due to an injury. I mean, it sucks, right? Because injuries, unfortunately, have been a big factor in these playoffs. Even though the playoffs overall have been good, right? I mean, you look at injuries to Embiid, Giannis, Kawhi, right? Even Ja, right? Like that's changed the trajectory of a number of these series and just the playoffs in general, right? Because if Giannis just is out for the rest of the series and Milwaukee's eliminated, that completely changes the whole, map and the whole pathway of this playoff
Yeah.
of this postseason.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully he's able to come back and play. And Milwaukee can, figure something out. But I mean, this is tough. And then again, I forgot to mention in terms of injuries, Butler, he got hurt.
Right.
He hurt his back. He didn't. He was available to come back, but they were up by so much that they didn't really need him.
Yeah.
So that was good, So hopefully he can play, but he is listed as questionable. So maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I'm gonna assume he's gonna play because it's a playoff game and he's not
Right.
just listed as out, right? But Giannis kind of needs to come back because if he doesn't come back, I mean, I'm not saying Miami is going to win this series, but obviously the chances of them upsetting Milwaukee becomes significantly higher. So
Yeah.
this is kind of concern time if you're Milwaukee. You need Giannis back out there.
Yeah, for sure. If Giannis is available, he needs to be playing. Um, and then moving on into our next game, uh, this one was, in my opinion, hilarious. This was the Lakers game versus Memphis. Lakers came away 111 to 101 at home. And to sum this one up for me, I'm gonna let you do most of the talking on this one because
Yeah.
obviously the Laker fan, but to start it off, this was an absolute freaking Dylan Brooks disaster class, in my opinion. The guy freaking went below the belt on LeBron on a cheap shot. Unacceptable. He got ejected. And then obviously Ja Morant erupted for a game, 45 points, 13 assists, 9 rebounds, but it just was not enough. They were already in a hole and they were getting blown out in the beginning of the game. But, take it away, man. Lakers fan
Yeah.
perspective. Let's hear it.
So obviously, the first quarter, um, you kind of knew, you kind of sensed early on, right, the way that the game started off, right? LeBron kind of got it going early with 8 quick points in the first.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of felt like a tone was being set, right? Obviously, we had the scenario at the end of game two, right, where you have Dylan Brooks, talking to LeBron, right, and obviously, he was talking about stuff, post game, right, in the locker room about, I don't poke bears, or whatever it was he said. I think that was what he said, something like that,
This
right?
guy's a joke, dude.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah, like he's
stupid.
old. I don't poke bears. Yeah, yeah. So, and you just knew that that was probably a mistake, right? You knew
Um,
LeBron and was gonna get these guys focused, right? And he said, I only respect people who drop 40, and LeBron didn't need to drop 40.
oh,
I knew he wasn't going. I didn't think he was gonna, try to, be goaded into, just jacking up shots, trying to score
no.
40 points, because that's LeBron's too smart, to get into something like that. But I was really impressed with the tone that the Lakers set. I mean, 35-9 at the end of the first quarter. I mean, Memphis did miss some shots like where they were open, but also like a big part of it was the Lakers defense was just ridiculous. I mean, they were incredibly laser focused, the complete opposite energy wise from what we saw in game two. A lot of the adjustments that I talked about personally that I said that they needed to make, they definitely made. They did a much better job of stopping those Jaren Jackson Jr. post ups, right? He got into foul trouble in the first half, didn't really do as much in this game. Right? They completely backed off Dylan Brooks and let him shoot, right? I think he was 3 for 13 before he got tossed,
Disaster class,
right?
man. I called it, or not
Yeah,
called it, but I said it.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So not much there, right? I mentioned AD, he wasn't going to have back-to-back poor performances, 31 and 17 with 3 blocks, great defensively and offensively. Right, they did a better job of getting the ball to him, right, in space, right, in transition, with movements. Not as many post ups this time around because I think against this team that's a little bit more difficult to do.
Yeah.
Right. You still got good performances out of other guys, right? D'Lo, right, was kind of up and down, 5 of 14, but I thought his first quarter was pretty good. I thought he did a really good job, setting the table, playmaking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Stats don't look great, but I thought he was overall a positive
Yeah.
for the game. Obviously LeBron, 25 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists. Had a -6 plus minus, which is kind of interesting. Part of it was he was out there, right, when the Lakers, kind of took their foot off the gas.
Yes.
So that, plays a factor. Rui Hachimura off the bench, 16 and 5, 6 of 10. He's been great in this series. This was kind of one of the X factors that we talked about,
Yes.
right? In addition to like say the Laker guards and AD, but Rui was also, one of those guys where if he's making an impact off the bench, right, as their big wing 6'8" forward, right, he was going to make a difference, right, battling on the boards, scoring in transition, right, scoring around the rim, attacking mismatches, right? He's done a really good job, and he's like been one of the reasons why they've been able to take
Yes.
advantage this series, right? He had 29 in game one.
Yes.
Excuse me. In game two, he had 20 points in the loss, right? But still, he's been one of the best players on the floor this series. And that's kind of been the key, right, for the Lakers is, for me, the concern going into the series, which is why initially I was kind of leaning Memphis, was I was just curious as to, how LA would be able to score against Memphis's defense. I knew LA could defend because they've been one of the best defensive teams, but I was kind of, worried about offensively what they would look like. And again, it's not like they're scoring a ton of points, right? But they are doing better on offense than Memphis, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the final score, they only won by 10, but it was not like a 10-point game. They were, I mean, they weren't going to stay up by 30 points for the entire game, right? They took their foot off the gas. Right. And in Memphis, got back into the game, right? Ja Morant had that stretch where he scored like 20 straight points, including, just draining threes, right? That's going to be kind of interesting if they, adjust, to his 3-point shooting. I don't think you need to adjust too much, right? Because in general, you want him to take a high volume of threes. If he's going to make them, hats off to him, right? But, you don't want him around the basket. You want him more on the perimeter, right? And that was
Right.
half of his makes. And but he did get to the line a ton. Um, so that's going to be interesting. But that was kind of the thing for Memphis is that no one other than Ja really showed up. Bane was okay, right? But other than that, Ja was really the only guy for most of the first half for Memphis that could do anything. I mean, they had 9 points in the first quarter. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that's just not good enough.
No.
So I do kind of wonder energy wise what the Lakers look like for game four. I don't think they're necessarily going to do that again, but I think that they can defend Memphis pretty well. The crowd I thought gave them a ton of energy. So my main question for them is mainly just the bench, right? Other than Rui, it doesn't feel like anybody off the bench really did a whole lot. Um, but in general, I feel like it feels like the momentum has shifted towards LA just because it just doesn't feel like Memphis really has much of an answer for AD. Obviously, he wasn't great in game two, but I thought through the first two, through game one and this game, he was much better.
Mm-hmm.
LeBron's been solid, right? D'Lo bounced back. Reeves was fine. So it just kind of feels like Memphis might be running out of options. I mean, they can make adjustments. They can, but now game four is kind of a must win for Memphis, right? And they're not a great road team, and they need to win because if they don't win game four, right? LA goes up 3-1 and that series is pretty much done. And that's going to be pretty tough to be the number 2 seed and get knocked out in the first round,
Yeah.
after they had, a pretty solid regular season. So, they kind of need to figure some stuff out because it does feel like LA is kind of taking the momentum, um, in LA. So, they got to figure something out because, I mean, 9 points in the first quarter is pretty rough,
Yeah.
right? And again, like the Lakers won by 10, but I mean, never, not at all did I ever feel like they were going to lose the game, right? There were times where they got close, but I didn't think they were ever going to lose. It just felt like they had built up enough of a lead in that first quarter, almost 30 points. I think they said it was tied for the biggest first quarter lead in playoff history or something like that. I
Yeah.
mean, like when you have a lead like that, you're just not going to lose it unless you just don't do anything the rest of the way, right? It kind of felt like they were just trying to hold down the lead for the rest of the game, right?
Yeah.
There were stretches where it got kind of weird, but overall, like I think this is pretty impressive.
Yeah. And with this series, that Lakers game one really, them winning game one, I think really
Yeah.
is going to help them, down the line, even if this series goes, any further. But, once again, Dylan Brooks disaster class. I think that sums it up for Memphis' side.
When
You
he
know,
got suspended, I was kind of worried that Memphis was going to get, or not suspended, ejected. I thought Memphis might get back into the game because he was just throwing up,
yeah,
just
it
straight
was
up
it was
brick.
garbage. It was terrible. Um,
Yeah, I didn't realize poking the bear. I didn't realize that LeBron's, crown jewels was the bear.
Yeah, like I don't know. The guy is cringe, and you know what's funny? Like coming in when he first came into the league, I didn't have a problem with him. I had watched him in Oregon. And I thought he's a decent player. I don't know what happened.
Like this coming into the
He
NBA.
wasn't like this, so I don't know what happened. But yeah, not a we don't want to give him any more attention. Don't want to harp on him, any longer. But yeah, to kind of swing back into the Knicks Cavs series. This game wrapped up on Sunday, and the Knicks are up 3-1 now. They've they pulled out a win on Sunday, 102-93. New York, that is, they took the lead. So 3-1. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying about the other game that we were talking about, the other Cleveland Knicks game. Donovan Mitchell, you got to pick it up, man. This isn't a good look, especially since this is the team, that you could have potentially gone to in the Knicks. But it's just a weird, weird, weird team. I just don't know what to say. It seems like they're collapsing. Garland had a somewhat of a bounce back game, 23 points, 10 assists, 2 rebounds, much better than his previous performance. But, then you look at Donovan Mitchell, 11 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds. And it's kind of giving me the vibes of, who really, who's the guy with the keys, we would assume it would be Donovan Mitchell because, he's the guy who dropped 70 something this season. So,
Yeah,
you would think, you would think that the guy, it has the keys to the offense, but sometimes it just doesn't look like he can get it going. And the Knicks have guarded him very well, I thought, or I think. And then, moving on down, Jared Allen, 14 points, Evan Mobley, 12 points, Karis LeVert, 14, Chetty Osman, 10, Isaac Coro, 9. I think this was definitely a better showing than the previous game, but still not enough because, if you look at New York side, you had Jalen Brunson dropped 29 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds. Pretty, normal for him, I think, at this point in this series, that 20-point range. I think that's solid. That's what you want. But then, you look at RJ Barrett and he's just coming out of nowhere with 26. And, I think, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this guy was one of our X factors for this game.
Yep.
Or, this series. So,
Yeah.
he's been performing, and that's what New York needs. They need him to be better. When Randall's not performing well, like he did tonight, 7 points, 2 rebounds, 1 assist. Not enough, but, only 27 minutes. But, RJ, he put in 37 minutes, 26 points. I think that's a pretty big deal. And then, obviously Josh Hart, 19 points, 7 rebounds. Great addition. We were a big fan of that acquisition. So, shout out to Josh Hart. I know, you're a Laker fan, so obviously, you're pretty high on Josh Hart. I think a lot of people are.
Yep.
But yeah, this is not looking good for Cleveland. Like we said in the previous recap, they are in grave danger of being eliminated, and it could potentially happen if really. I don't want to single it out, but it has to be said. I think Donovan Mitchell needs to up his game, and you need to see Garland be a lot more consistent. But what were your thoughts on this one? Because I think it was a rough outing for Cleveland. Not as bad as the other game, but nonetheless still rough.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I know you said the series they're in grave danger. I think
Mm-hmm.
this series is probably done, to be
Exactly.
honest.
I didn't want to be
I
too
mean,
mean.
yeah, I know, but I'm just gonna say it. I mean, the issue with Cleveland, I think, where I think we kind of got some things wrong was, um, Like I said, in general, right, we did talk about that Cleveland's lack of wings was going to hurt them come playoff time.
Hmm.
It was just a question of was it going to hurt them against the Knicks? And I thought probably not,
Right.
but it definitely has, right? RJ Barrett these last two games has been great. He was, even better tonight, right? Or today, 26
Yeah.
points, 9 of 18 from the field, right? Free throw shooting was not great for the Knicks, right? But, it didn't matter, right? They still won by 9 points. Um, just in general, right? Julius Randle, right? You didn't get a great game from him, but you got some good minutes, right, with Obi Toppin. They closed with him. The key, I think, for the Knicks has pretty much been outside of RJ Barrett. You also, I think the bigs, Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein,
Hmm.
right? Just that big man duo, right? Battling for offensive rebounds, right? Kind of playing with force around the basket. Hartenstein's not really scoring, right? But Robinson's getting some putbacks around the basket, blocking shots. I just think their activity has been really key for the Knicks. Right, Josh Hart, I think, has also been a factor, right, in terms of battling on the boards. He started in place of Quentin Grimes, who I think was out with an injury.
Hmm.
Um, right, so just in general for Cleveland, the shooting has been a real problem. Right. Obviously, Mobley and Allen aren't going to give you a whole lot of floor spacing. They were fine offensively. Right. Garland was good. Right. Like you said, Mitchell really struggled. This was probably one of his worst playoff performances, right? Because he's generally been a really good, postseason player, but, he's kind of struggled the last couple of games. So, I just think the lack of shooting has kind of hurt Cleveland.
Hmm.
Right. Because again, right, if you had more spacing, right, that would allow for Mitchell, to get easier drives to the bucket, right? And again, without a natural 3-and-D wing, because again, Levert's played well, but he's not a forward; he's a guard, and he's kind of been forced to play, right? Because Okoro hasn't really given them a whole lot, right? He's closer to that idea of a wing, right?
Hmm.
But he's in terms of size, he's relatively small, for
Right.
a small forward. I think he's like what 6'4" or 6'5". I mean, even
I
though
think
he's
five.
pretty
Yeah.
solidly
Six
built,
five.
yeah. And he's also more of like a natural slasher, right?
Yeah.
Even though his shooting has improved, it feels like he's, more comfortable going to the basket. The bench has been a real problem, right? There, I mean, again, you got 10 from Osman and 9 from Okoro, but just in general, right? Like I said, the backup big thing is weird because this is kind of where like it's kind of interesting that they bought out Kevin Love because it feels like maybe they could have used him like even for like 5 or 10 minutes,
Exactly.
in the series, right? Just to put out another guy that can space the floor, that's been in playoff games. It just that scenario was just so strange.
Yeah, we talked
Um,
about that for a decent amount of time. We were like, that's such a
yeah,
weird thing.
exactly. Yeah, you don't usually see guys that are on a playoff team get bought out, right? So it's that thing was just kind of weird, right? But going back to the Knicks, right? Randall balled or not Randall Barrett balled out.
Yeah.
That was one of the X factors, probably the biggest one for the Knicks, right? Because when he gets it going, Cleveland doesn't really have anybody that can really do anything with him. Brunson's been awesome. He's been awesome all year, and he's been great in this series.
Hmm.
Right. I think he was a guy that was kind of looked at as being sort of a polarizing player in the offseason because a lot of people looked at the money he got
Yeah.
and thought it was a lot. But then once the contract details came out and you saw that, not only is it not that much money per season, it actually declines year by year, right? So, if let's say he, elevates even more next season, he's making less money. So that's pretty much great for the Knicks. Right, an example of why you kind of have to wait for all the details to come out. But he's been awesome.
Yeah.
Even better than I thought he would be because I thought he was really good. Watching him in Dallas, over the course of his time in Dallas. But I mean,
Hmm.
he's now a big time star. I mean, it's kind of been crazy just to see the growth from him. And, for the Knicks, this is really a special moment, right? Because, they have a chance to, take out the Cavs,
Hmm.
win a playoff series, I think for the first time, right? Since what, 2013, right? When
Yeah.
Melo was
Mellow.
there.
Yep.
And it's going to be interesting, right? Because, this Giannis situation, if the Bucks, were to, somehow lose to the Heat, right? And the Knicks are playing the Heat instead of the Bucks or something like that, or you're playing a hobbled Giannis. I mean, you have a chance to maybe, go even further and make the
Right.
conference finals. I mean, so this maybe, we were kind of wrong, and maybe this Knicks team should have been, kind of like more of the dark horse,
To
candidate
be
because it just
honest.
kind of feels like this Cavs team just hasn't been as good as we thought.
Right.
It is a young team, so I think they can get better, right? I kind of agree with you with the coaching. I don't think it's, I don't think the coaching has been too
No.
much of an issue. I think Bickerstaff has been fine. I just think it's just kind of tough, not having a ton of floor spacing and not having a lot of options at the wing. It's
Yeah.
just hard, to match up with this Knicks team. And again, it's going to be tough, right? Because you're paying a lot of money to a lot of guys, so I don't think you're going to have a whole lot of flexibility to make a lot of moves,
Right.
right? So it feels like you're probably going to have to pull off some type of trade, with somebody. But again, right? It's a young team; they can get better. But again, I think the Mitchell Garland thing. You might have to figure out something with that, right? Because the Cavs did make a run in the third to start the third.
Mm-hmm.
They got back into the game, right? Because they kind of put the ball in Garland's hands, and he kind of, just used his speed to get around the Knicks, right? And kind of set up Mobley and Allen, and then it kind of just went right back to Mitchell, just taking bad shots, right? That where the Knicks were playing really good defense on him. So that's something that I think might have to be ironed out in the offseason. But I
Mm-hmm.
just think in general, if you can find some wings, find a capable backup big, and I think you can find a lot of those type of guys around the league. I don't think it's that difficult to find a backup big. The wing is probably more difficult, and
Yes.
that's kind of the more pressing need.
Yeah.
But if you could do that, right, you got a chance, to still hang around next season. But I just want to give a lot of credit to this Knicks team because they've kind of been a team where I think people have kind of been up and down on them because they had stretches during the regular season where they played really well, and then other stretches where they kind of tailed off. But they're peaking at the right time. And Brunson has pretty much turned this team and this franchise around, right? Because again, I have to reiterate, this if they win and eliminate the Cavs, this will be the first time in basically a decade that they've won a playoff series.
Yeah. Shout out to New
Um,
York,
you know,
man.
yeah, exactly. And if things go their way, right, with this Bucks thing, knock on wood, because we don't want Giannis hurt, obviously,
Right.
right? They
Right.
have a chance to go even further, right? Which would be, just an incredible turnaround for a team, that a year ago just felt like they were kind of just really in trouble. So, big shout out to the Knicks. I think they proved a lot of people, including us, wrong. I thought that the Knicks could make it a series. I didn't pick them to win, but I didn't think it was going to be like a 4 or 5 game series. I thought it was going to go 6 or 7, but I mean, shoot, it might go 5 at this point, but just the way of the Knicks. So I think Cleveland's got some, answers to figure out, with this core of guys. You got a good core, but you need a little bit more, I think.
Yeah. I
Rounding
agree
out.
with you. I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Um, and to move on into, I think this was probably the most exciting game of the week. We had Golden State versus Sacramento. Golden State came away with game 4. So series is tied 2-2 now. Golden State has won both at home, and the Kings have won both at home. So, Golden State took the 126 to 125 victory. 1 point game came down to a final possession. We'll talk about that in a second, but, we got to start with the Warriors, of course. Steph Curry, he put on a shooting clinic, 32 points. And then, if you look around at this box score, I think this is the ideal game that you want from the Warriors. You want Steph in that 30 range, and then everyone else kind of follows. You had Jordan Poole, 22 points. I think that's what you want from him. Maybe a little bit more efficient. That's been a question mark on his, young career, is the efficiency level. But, nonetheless, 22 points, that helps you get the win. Klay Thompson, obviously, 26 points. That's what you want from him. I think that's a good range, in between that 20 and 25 range. I think that's what you want from Klay, coming back to his former self. Then you have Wiggins, 18 points. I think that's what you want too. 18 to 20, something around that range. He had 8 rebounds to go along with it. Looney, great rebounder. He had 8 points, 6 assists, 14 rebounds. Everybody just kind of showed up and did their job, And Draymond, obviously, coming back from the suspension, 12 points, 7 assists, 10 rebounds. When Draymond, impacts the game in the way that he does on, the offensive end and the defensive end, I think, that gives him a better chance at winning, because, it sets everybody up. It helps free up the off-ball stuff, all the schemes that they run. So, shout out to the Warriors from winning this one. Like we said, game 4, now the series is tied 2-2. Then, if you look at the Kings, De'Aaron Fox, he's just been balling on another level, put up 38 points in 40 minutes with 5 assists and 9 rebounds. Great game from him. And then, coming down the line, you got Keegan Murray, who finally showed up, I think, 23 points, 7 rebounds. This is a kind of game that you want to see from him. It's hard to ask a rookie to just be dropped into, this playoff heated environment and, come out of there, shooting lights out. But, he's doing that now. He wasn't really a factor in the other games. Unfortunately, they couldn't get the win. But, Malik Monk, 16 points. He's kind of cooled off, unfortunately. That's something that I thought would have been I thought he would have continued that, but he is cooling off. And it was funny. I didn't really even think of him as being a contender for sixth man of the year, but I think he should have been in contention for that. Davion Mitchell, he had 12 points. Tried his best against Curry, but it's just not enough. But for this game, I'm kind of going to skip to the fourth quarter. I just don't like Harrison Barnes taking that last shot. But I do understand the Warriors kind of game planned and did their homework on Fox. Obviously clutch player of the year. He had the ball in his hands for the final possession, but he was doubled. There was no way he could get a good shot off. He kicked it to Harrison Barnes, who I guess you could say had a better shot, but at the same time, I wouldn't really look to Harrison Barnes to go to that or to take that final shot. And that's no knock on him. It's just I think there's better guys on this team that are more capable of shooting that shot. But what were your thoughts on this game? Because I thought it was crazy. I mean, 126 to 125, final possession.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. This was kind of the first game where in the series where both teams shot really well.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Sacramento did a great job of responding in the first quarter. After Golden State came out with that initial punch, right? Sacramento actually went into the first quarter with a lead,
Mm-hmm.
right, and then kind of extended that into the second quarter, right? So they were up at halftime. What was it? It was like 69-65, right?
Yeah,
So
I
it was
think
pretty
so.
close. So you knew this game was probably going to come down to the wire. Then the Warriors have a big third quarter, right? Kind of like turning into the Warriors of old, right? Where the third quarter is kind of where they turn around. And then the fourth quarter happened. And, it was kind of weird because, I mean, it felt like the game was kind of over, right? But then, the Warriors just had that, almost, borderline monumental collapse, right? Where, they call a timeout, right? But they don't have any timeouts left. So they get a technical foul, right? Where, the Kings get a free throw. Then the Kings are able to score. And it's before you know it, all of a sudden it's a 1 point game and the Kings have an actual chance to steal the game at the buzzer.
Yeah,
The final possession was kind of interesting because, you do kind of wonder if Mike Brown could do it again. Would he have called a timeout, right? Considering the
very
Kings are
true.
really good in transition. But they also had like a lot of stretches in the fourth where they had fast break opportunities and they were just throwing the ball away. So
Yes.
I can't necessarily fault him for, calling a timeout. I feel like a lot of coaches probably would have just said, just run down the floor, let De'Aaron Fox use his speed and,
Right.
find a way to score in
Get
transition. But
downhill.
I don't know. I mean, they had a lot of turnovers. It was weird because it felt like even though the Warriors won and you do have to give them credit, it feels just like a blown opportunity for the Kings because they had a real chance, because they had the lead at one point in the fourth and they outscored the Warriors in the fourth
Yes.
by about 9 points. So it just feels like a blown opportunity. Sabonis had a pretty rough game
Yeah.
offensively, right? 14 points on 13 shots. Um, just around the rim, he just hasn't been that effective. And, part of it obviously is the Warriors defense, Draymond and Looney. I think
Mm-hmm.
Draymond, particularly to close the game, I thought
Yeah.
played great defense on
Really good.
Sabonis. Barnes obviously struggled 3 for 11, right? You don't really look to him for scoring. Obviously, it was good to see Keegan Murray bounce back. I mean, a 9 of 13, 5 of 7 from three performance. I don't know if that's going to happen again. Kevin
Right.
Herter, you
Yeah.
got to have him show up. He had 2 points,
Yeah.
1 for 4. Right? He makes just one shot, right? And then that's probably the series right there. I mean, the Kings go up 3-1. I don't know. I
Exactly.
mean, the series is tied, but I mean, Golden State could have easily lost this game, and then we're talking about all of a sudden the Kings are up 3-1, and that series is donezo.
Yeah.
But obviously, they tie up the series. We both thought the Warriors were going to win the series, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be interesting because they're going to have to go back to Sacramento and win. And if they can win Game 5, then I think they'll win the series and close it out at home in Game 6.
Yeah.
But I think if they win Game 5, if they lose Game 5, I think this is probably going to go 7.
Yes.
Because I don't think the Kings are going to have another performance like this at the Chase Center in Game 6. Maybe they do. I mean, the Kings have actually been the best road team in the Western Conference, right? So, and this was a game where they could have won.
Yeah.
Right, De'Aaron Fox, he had 38, but 21 at halftime. It did feel like at different points, right, like in the third quarter, they did a much better job of slowing him down and guarding
Mm-hmm.
him. I just feel like he's taken a few too many threes. I mean, he took
Yes.
11 threes, and he's a 32% three-point shooter.
Too high of a
Um,
volume for me.
yeah, I just think that's too. And again, part of that is the Warriors' defense at times forces him, to kind of play from the outside. And to his credit, he's made some of these threes in these games,
Yes.
but I don't know. I can't really complain too much about De'Aaron Fox, right? Because I
No.
mean, they wouldn't have gotten back into the game if he didn't hit some of the shots he made.
Right.
Again, I just do kind of wonder, right? That last possession, I just do kind of wonder if you get out and run, maybe you do a better job. But again, right? Given how many times they turned the ball over in the fourth quarter, I don't know. But it's just weird because The Warriors won, but I mean, they could have easily lost this game, and that would have just been a blunder because they should have closed the game out, and it really shouldn't have come to the point where Harrison Barnes could have made a three to win to
Yeah.
basically win the
Yeah.
series. I mean, that's kind of weird. That doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence about them going forward. But still, either way, you got to win, in the way that you can. And they clearly showed that, when their backs are against the wall, right, they can't be counted out. So now you just kind of have to see if they can do it again, but this time on the road. Because again, when they're at home, they are a championship caliber team. They're 33-8, I think, during the regular season at home. When they're on the road, they're 11-30, and they're basically a lottery team. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
key to this series. They have to win one game in Sacramento to win this series because obviously they don't have home court, and that's how it's going to go the rest of the postseason. By the way, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, unless the only way that doesn't happen is if they get out of the first round and they play, say, the Lakers, because I believe they'll have home court against the Lakers,
Yeah.
um, right? But if let's say if the Grizzlies win, they won't have home court advantage against them. So that's going to be something to kind of look out for because
Yes.
they need to play better. I mean, the first two games were pretty close. I didn't necessarily think they played bad. The Kings played better, but it's just, are we going to get like an awful version of them on the road? Because if we get an awful version of them on the road, right, which I don't think we've seen just yet, I don't know. Because again, and then the other factor is Sacramento, right? Because again, we talked about it. Both teams. This was the first game where both teams shot really well. Because Sacramento had been awful from three
Yes.
for most of this
It was
series,
really bad.
and Golden State, hadn't been that great either. So that's kind of a factor. So Sacramento, I think Game 5 is a must win for the Kings because if they lose Game 5, I think they're probably going to lose the series.
Yes.
So their backs are kind of against the wall. The pressure's kind of on them now because Golden State, right? They've been here, done that. The series is tied. They know all they got to do is just win two more games. So again, the Kings, it's a young team, right? That hasn't been in a position like this before. There's a lot of pressure on them. So we're gonna see
Yes.
just what these guys can do, in a situation like this, right? Because I feel like right now a lot of people feel like Golden State has taken the momentum back, but Golden State did do what they were supposed to do. I still think the Warriors are going to win the series. They were my pick to win this series. Obviously, it hasn't been great, right? I mean, again, if the
Right.
Harrison Barnes shot goes in, it's 3-1. But then you can
Yeah.
also look at in game one, right? That Wiggins shot, right? If that goes
Yep.
in, then maybe the Warriors are up 3-1 instead. So, obviously it's pretty clear that this is gonna be a long series, right? It has to be now, right? It's gonna go at least six. Right? Every game has pretty much been close,
Mm-hmm.
right? A couple of these games literally have come down to the last possession.
Yep.
So this pretty much has been the best series,
I think
bar
so as
none, in the
well.
first round. And
Yeah.
this was, kind of the one that everybody looked at as the best series, right? Because you got the defending champs, right, with their backs against the wall against, like this young, explosive team. And, so far it's lived up to the billing. So,
Mm-hmm.
it'll be great to see, how this series ends. Because I think it could go either way. Because
It really
again, the
could.
Warriors, I picked them to win the series, but
Me too.
I don't feel super confident about them. I mean, I think they will win the series, but it's not necessarily because I think they've been great. Because again, they could have lost this game. It was a 1 point game, but I mean, in fairness, you could say it was an all-time blunder that probably won't happen again, where you call a timeout with no timeouts left. I mean, you
Yeah.
just don't normally see that in a
No.
game by anybody.
No.
That's a mistake you never see. So I mean, at least at the NBA level, right?
Right.
Maybe a
Right. Right.
lower level, but I don't know. I mean, this was a fun game. I thought Golden State was going to win the game, but and they did, but I don't feel great about it.
Yeah. They need to shake that bad news Bears on the road alter ego they've got going on. But to circle back to Boston, they played the Hawks again. So this was game 4. They won 129-121. So, this series is basically over. Boston's up 3-1. Obviously, Tatum and Brown, Jaylen Brown, that is, 62 combined, each of them put up 31 points in their respective, from their respective spots, of course. I just think they're such a great duo. But, looking down the line, you've also got Derek White, Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon. They're just putting up solid numbers that, kind of just make you go like, wow, this team is so, put together. It's great. Well, not great for me because I'm not a Celtics fan at all. But for the Celtics fans, that's great for you guys. So you're up in the series. I thought this was an interesting game. And the second half is kind of where things kind of started getting a little bit closer. Atlanta started fighting back a little bit. And then obviously, if we look at Atlanta's side, Trae Young had 35 and 15. He's kind of, like we said in the previous Atlanta game, he's kind of been rebounding a little bit. 35 points, 15 assists. So, bouncing back from, some mediocre games earlier in the series. And then obviously DeAndre Hunter, he had 27 points, 2 assists, 7 rebounds. I think that's what you want to see from a young guy like that. Clint Capella, 10 points, 7 rebounds. DeJounte Murray, 23 points, 6 assists, 9 rebounds. But, everywhere else is just pretty much nothing. I mean, if you want to talk about Bogdanovich, he had 8 points. But, John Collins has just been very, bad, just to be blunt. And, we like John Collins. That's one of our guys on this podcast. So, unfortunately, he has not played that well. But, yeah, I think this series is pretty much over now because I think they were in Atlanta when they got the win on Sunday. So, I mean, this is just not looking good for Atlanta. And, we'll see what they do in the offseason. But, Trae Young is looking a little bit better. So I guess that's a good sign. But, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just kind of another situation where I think Boston is just better. It was kind of interesting. Tatum, for a good chunk of the game, right, wasn't shooting great, right. Jaylen Brown was kind of getting it going, right, and then Tatum came, to the party, right. Like you said, 62 combined from those two guys,
Yeah.
right. That's your duo, that's your core. And again, they're getting great contributions from other guys, right. Marcus Smart, Derek White, Robert Williams, Brogdon, right? Again, Williams is kind of the key for Boston, right now, because again, he's the guy, right, that really raises the Celtics ceiling, especially on the defensive end.
Yeah.
Right, with his shot blocking, right, his rebounding ability. Um, so they need him, to play really well, right? He's been coming off the bench, obviously, as he spent, a good chunk of the season injured. I do kind of wonder when Boston, makes the switch, to put him back in the starting lineup. Because obviously, he's normally a starter for them, right? But obviously it's been working, right? You don't really want to, switch up what's been working, right? Kind of, actually forgot to mention, Draymond came off the bench, right, for Golden State, right? In this game, obviously, coming back from his suspension, so Robert Williams, right, coming off the bench, right, mainly, returning from injury. So, like you said, Trae Young was, had a, better game, right? 11 for 26 isn't great, right? But still 15 assists, 35 points. You'll take that.
Yeah.
Right? Murray was okay. But like you said, right? John Collins, 1 for 9, 5 points, 5 rebounds, right? Just not really giving them really much of anything in this series. Um, he's probably a guy that, we've talked, his name has been in trade rumors a ton, but Atlanta just hasn't, moved on from him. But it feels like at this point, right? I think it might be a little too late where if you move him, you're probably not getting a whole lot back from him. It feels like his value's kind of diminished, right? And again, I feel like he is a good player, but he has not looked good for Atlanta this season. And in this series, he's just been awful. And that's kind of the guy where I do kind of wonder, what happens with him, right? He only played 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Right, whereas all the other starters, right, played like, 40 minutes for the most part. So I don't know, right? Like, I mean, it's been really rough for him. So I don't know what Atlanta does. Again, we talked about it before, right? Maybe they move Trae Young, maybe they move somebody else. I don't know, but again, we didn't really. It's just weird because Atlanta, they have talent, but it's just so bizarre how mediocre they've been this season. When they did start the season off relatively well, they did have
Yeah.
some injuries. But then then of course they fired McMillan, right? So firing the coach, never really gives you a whole lot of confidence about how the team is doing, right? Quinn Snyder, right? I mean, he's been fine, I guess, but the team still isn't really winning. Um, so it just feels like major changes are needed for that team. And again, we'll get into these eliminated teams, more, probably in future segments,
Hmm.
as we have time to talk about them. But just in general, right? Boston, it does kind of feel like things might be turning towards them as the favorites to come out of the East, right? We don't know what's
Yeah.
happening with the Giannis injury, right? And, currently they're down 2-1 or, to the Heat. Um, so I don't know. I mean, Boston, they've been looking really good. Even though Atlanta's battled in these games, right? Boston's the better team, right? They're not going
Yeah.
to lose to Atlanta.
No,
So,
no, no.
pretty soon, right? It'll be game 5, right? They'll probably close out the Hawks, and then they'll be playing against Philly, and right, and that'll be a great series. The second round really is when the Eastern Conference series are gonna, be really fun. I think. Um, even though again, some of these series, right? Like we didn't expect the Heat Bucks one to be that competitive, right? But
Yeah.
obviously you have to factor in the Giannis injury. But just in general, right? I think as we get to the second round, the Eastern Conference will heat up because obviously the West has already been great in round one. But the East, aside from, Knicks Cavs, right, hasn't really been all that amazing. But, still, regardless, right, I just do kind of wonder, right, where do you go from here if you're Atlanta? And, again, with Boston, it feels like the tide might be turning towards them. We'll see how they match up against Philly again. Overall, in the past, right, they've generally handled Philly relatively well. Right, and I think they're more than capable of doing it again. Obviously, and then again with Embiid, we have to factor him in as well because he's
Yes.
hurt.
Yep.
He's Doc Rivers says he's got a 50-50 shot of playing to start the series, right? So who knows, right? Obviously, he didn't feel good enough to play in Game 4, right? But again, there's still a decent amount of time before that series is even going to start.
Yep.
So again, it's been shaping up to be like a great postseason so far,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of storylines. It sucks that so many guys are hurt, but regardless, I think the quality of basketball has been good, and it's kind of interesting, when we talked about the scoring over the course of the regular season, right? In terms of how great the offensive, production has been for a lot of these teams. But when you go into the playoffs, right? I mean, we've had some high scoring games, but we've also had some dog fights defensively. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at the Knicks Cavs series, right? Where I mean, Cleveland scores 79 points in a game in a playoff game. I mean, that doesn't. I mean, that hasn't happened in a while. Um, right? I mean, you look at, like say Brooklyn, Philly, right, where those have been some of those games have been relatively low scoring, right? I mean, you're not seeing a lot of 130, 140, offensive performances, like we saw a lot during the regular season. You're seeing, kind of just more normal-ish scores, right? Obviously, some of these teams, right, are scoring high, at a high level, right? Like this Kings Warriors game was 126, 125. But then in the previous game, both teams barely scored over 100. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been kind of interesting to see, the scoring dip come playoff time, right? Which kind of shows, right? The postseason is a different, honestly, almost like a different league than the regular season
To be
because, it's
honest.
been really interesting to see, some guys, right, who looked great in the regular season, right? Like say a Sabonis, right, where he looked really good for the Kings in the regular season, but so far through the playoffs, right, Fox has definitely been their best player. Because I think, some people kind of thought, yeah, Sabonis is their most important player. It's been De'Aaron Fox. Um,
Yeah.
and then when you look at some of these other teams, right, say, Cleveland's really struggled to score. And they had times in the regular season where their offense wasn't great, right? But it's really reared its ugly head in this series. I mean, they've had what, like 2 or 3 games where they didn't get over 100, and including one game where they didn't even get over 80. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's been interesting to see the playoffs and how different it is in terms, especially in regards to, the physicality.
Yeah.
I do kind of wonder why we don't why the officiating changes in the playoffs. I
I
I, I
never
don't know. I feel
understood
like it
that.
should just yeah, I feel like it should just be relatively consistent. I understand from an effort perspective, it's going to be different, right? Because these are much higher stakes games.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with that, but it just feels kind of weird, right? Where like, you see guys that, clearly aren't used to, playoff officiating and how different it is in terms of them kind of just letting people get away with more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels like, why isn't that happening in the regular season? I mean, I guess it's part of the product, right? Because,
Yeah.
the obviously not as many people generally watch the regular season. But I mean, if you're going to watch regular season games, you probably would prefer higher scoring games, right? As opposed to, I mean, if we saw a game that was like 79 to 84, in the regular season, I mean, we probably would, not too many people would probably watch it as much. So,
Yeah.
it just kind of goes to show just the differences, in the regular season and in the playoffs. And I guess, it's similar in other sports, like say like I guess a football or
Okay.
baseball, but in basketball, it really feels like a
Yeah.
significant difference. I mean, it's night and day, the playoffs versus the regular season. Because I mean, just seeing like the change in effectiveness of some guys, and or just seeing like the strategies and the adjustments that the coaches have to make, over the course of a 7 game series, rather than playing a team one day and then playing a different team 3 days later. It's been really cool to see. It's like a chess match in
Yeah.
a way.
For sure. And I think that goes with, all aspects of the game. And you kind of mentioned football briefly. I kind of wanted to shed some light on that with like postseason NFL games. It's so weird because the reffing does change. There's a lot of calls that, you know would normally get called in the regular season, but they kind of just let them go because it is one game elimination, and a lot of those games can make or break somebody's season, because it's one game, like I said. So, I get that, but at the same time, I would just like the standard to be the same. Honestly, just keep
Yeah.
it a even level playing field so people don't get confused or nobody has any gripes or grudges or anything like that. But
Yeah.
that's a good point to bring up though.
Yeah, because even with like the stuff like we're seeing guys getting tossed.
Yeah,
Like Harden, he gets tossed, right? Dylan
I don't
Brooks
agree
gets
with that
tossed,
one. I
right?
agree
Trey
with the
Young gets
Dylan Brooks
tossed.
one, but not the
Yeah, I
Harden
mean,
one.
like just in general, like I mean, it's just been kind of interesting to see, what they call and what they like. You had Claxton right get a tech for staring at a guy, and like I understand, like if you get in a guy's face, right? But then there's like other times where you see guys getting in each other's faces, and then they're like, there's no tech, and it's
Yeah.
just really strange. It's just it's inconsistent. And in general, I just kind of I would like to see the officiating in the regular season and the playoffs mirror each other.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, for a lot of teams, the goal is to get to the playoffs and win. So,
Right.
like, it would be nice, to kind of see, that, fall into a similar category. But I don't think that's necessarily going to happen because just in general, right? I think, they like the fact that the playoffs are different than the regular season.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, it's not what I would want, but, just in general, I understand it, right? Because again, from an entertainment perspective, right? I mean, we had a game in the regular season where two teams scored almost 200 combined points,
Yeah.
right? And then in the playoffs, we have a game where a team doesn't even score 80, right?
Yes.
They had like 50 through three quarters. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen in a regular season game.
Exactly.
And then I guess to wrap up the final game of the day, Minnesota survives. They avoid elimination, right? Game 4, they win 114-108. This game actually went into overtime. Denver was kind of out of the game, uh, right? And then over
Mm-hmm.
the last 3 minutes, they scored 12 unanswered points to get back into the game. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to win an OT.
Yeah.
Jokic balled out 43 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, 5 of 8 from three. Only 8 of 12 from the line though, so that was kind of that kind of is unfortunate, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
lost by 6, but still, he makes a couple more free throws.
Game could have probably gone
Obviously, that
differently.
yeah, but then also Jamal Murray, 19 points, 5 assists, 7 rebounds, but shot 8 for 21, 2 of 7
Right.
from three, right? So kind of a regression game, right? Also KCP, 5 points, 2 of 7, regression game. So, I kind of look at it more so like that. Obviously, Minnesota was, they want to avoid elimination, so you knew they were going to come out and play hard. It was back and forth, right? Denver was up in the first half, and then in the second half, Minnesota played much better. You got 34 from Edwards, right? 34, 5, and 6, along with 2 steals and 3 blocks. The thing that's been really impressive for me is his defensive prowess, his
Mm-hmm.
defensive engagement has been a lot better, I think, since he's, come into the league, right? He's got the frame, he's got the athleticism, he's got all the tools to do that.
Yeah.
So if he can be a force, on both ends of the floor, Minnesota, they've got somebody that they, like I said, they really can build around future wise, right? Mike Conley had a great bounce back game, 19
Mm-hmm.
points, 8 assists. Towns and Gobert, right, didn't do as much offensively, right? But, um, Towns fouled out, right? 17 and 11.
Of course.
Gobert, a much better performance, 14 points, 15 rebounds, 2 blocks. I mean, obviously, Jokic at 43. So, I mean, you can't necessarily say a whole lot, but still, in a game where they won, he was a +6 on the night.
Yeah.
So he was, I think, of him and Towns, probably the better big out there. Um, got a little bit more from the bench, right? Kyle Anderson, 11, 5, and 6. Torian Prince, hit 1 for 8, so not necessarily great there, but just in general, right? Like if you're Minnesota, right, you don't want to get swept. Even though I still think that this series is done, obviously you want to get at least one win in there. That would be pretty tough, to kind of go out. Like I said, you do the trade, that doesn't work out, and then all of a sudden, right, just to get swept in the first round as an eighth seed. I mean, that would be pretty embarrassing. I mean,
Yeah.
again, still think that this series is over, but again, good bounce back win for Minnesota. They did make it a game the last couple of games, so it's possible if things had gone different, maybe they win another one of those. But just in general, I do think Denver's better. They just didn't play well today. Not well enough to win. But again, it's hard to close out a team in a sweep. I mean, again, Philly was able to do it, but just in general, right? Closeout games are very difficult because the other team usually is going to come out with a high level of desperation.
Yes.
Obviously, Jokic came to play, but just in general, you needed better performances, just a couple guys, right, in Denver probably would have closed this out. But, just in general, right, you knew Minnesota was going to try to at least get one.
Yeah. And for me, at this point, you might as well rename, the Timberwolves to the Minnesota Ants, like, because Ant Edwards is literally on a tear. Like, I don't care what anybody says. This is officially his team now. I think, he's their future going forward, no matter what direction you look at it. I'm not saying completely move on from Towns, but I'm just saying, now you can look and say, okay, we have our guy. Let's restructure some stuff. Because, and this is my dark horse. So, I'm happy to see them get a win and not get, completely swept. And, there is a small chance that they could, win this series, but it's not likely at all. But they do have a very small chance. That's really all I really have to say about this game because, like, they're down 3-1. I mean, it's pretty much over. But once again, just to reiterate, there is a small chance, but Anthony Edwards is that guy. And shout out to Jokic, too, for that 43-point game. That's my MVP. I'm going to keep saying that. I'm going to stand by it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, we had said this earlier in the season at different points that Edwards, we both think is the guy that Minnesota needs to build around, needs to
Yeah.
figure out, how to maximize, because I do think this is his team. I mean, obviously in the play-in, right, Towns had those really good performances to get Minnesota to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
But still, right, Towns was out for a majority of the season. And, while he was out, a lot of the other guys like Edwards, right, like, Mike Conley, and other guys like that, right? They're the guys that kind of held it down. And again, I don't
Yeah.
think Towns is a bad player. Again, there's things I don't like about him in terms of fouling way too much, and just not really being that great defensively. But
Yeah.
in general, I still think he's a talented player. Again, if Minnesota does decide to move on from him, I think somebody will take him. Again, I
Yeah.
don't necessarily know what the ceiling is, for a team because he's gonna be on a huge contract, right? Also he's dealing with injuries more, so that's something to kind of look at because he was very durable for most of his career, but he's battled injuries the last few seasons, so that's
Yes.
kind of something to look at in combination with that big contract as he gets older.
Yeah.
Um, so, I don't know what you do there, but you got to figure out what you can do with this Gobert trade. Because, I mean, at this point, he gave up a bunch of picks, gave up young talent. So you're kind of sunk there. So you kind of really just have to figure out how can we, make it not as bad, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it's already been bad. But, at this point, even if you trade him, I mean, he's another guy that's making a ton of money. Right. I think when he's in his 30s, he's going to be making like 40 million a year,
That's
right? And it
crazy.
just it does to me. It feels like he's declined a little bit. I know he hasn't been awful in this series, right? He's had some decent performances, box score wise, but just in general, he does not feel as impactful as he had been in Utah.
Not
And
worth what they
maybe
gave
that,
up.
yeah, exactly, right. It's not worth what you gave up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that says, something about, maybe him being a little bit overrated in Utah. But regardless, it just hasn't worked. And Minnesota's got to figure out, what to do with that. Because again, Edwards is awesome. Um, and it would be nice if you could build a solid team around him before you have to pay him a ton of money.
Exactly.
That's kind of one of the things that Dallas messed up with Luca, where you had some solid players around him right before he was on that max deal, right? You even had Jalen Brunson, right? But then
Yeah.
he's gone. You got literally nothing out of him, right? You got Christian Wood, and he might leave again for nothing, even though they didn't give up a ton to get him, right? But still, you don't want to lose a decent player for nothing. So, just in general, like if you're Minnesota, you got a tough task, right? Because I mean, and it's weird because again, the GM, this is the guy that built the Denver Nuggets, right? I mean, Tim Connolly, he was the GM in Denver, right? So he's the guy that found Jokic in the second round, right? Drafted Jamal Murray, drafted Michael Porter Jr., took a chance on him, right? Traded for Aaron Gordon. I mean, he put together this Denver team that's really good
Yeah.
for the most part. And it's just so bizarre how he goes to Minnesota and just for whatever reason just loses his mind. I mean, obviously the
Yeah.
Mike Conley trade, that's solid, but again, he's an older player, so I don't know how many good years he's got left. Obviously, you got out of having to pay D'Lo, but still, right? Like, I mean, the Gobert trade, I don't know how you bounce back from that because
Yeah.
that's just awful. I mean, I'm going to continue to say that that is one of the worst trades that I can remember, and it's got to be one of up there as one of the worst trades ever. I mean,
Yeah.
again, just considering what they gave up and what they're getting in return and where Minnesota is, I mean, they're not any better than they were last year. I mean, honestly, to me, they're worse because they're the 8th seed, and again, they're going to lose in round one to Denver, right? They luckily avoided a sweep, but they're not getting out of the first round. So, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you could say, if Towns has a healthy year, maybe we'll be better. But again, still, like that's a lot to give up for, just being a decent team. It's kind of like with Atlanta, right? They didn't give up as much for DeJounte Murray because it was just picks, but that's going to be kind of tough to swallow that, Atlanta gave up draft picks, to get DeJounte Murray. And again, he's been good, but the team, right, as a whole, right, hasn't been good enough, in my opinion, to justify giving up. I
Yeah.
think it was like three or four unprotected first round picks. I mean, just a couple of these trades just have been just really just bad for some of these teams when you consider that, that those teams were in a good position. And I think that those teams, I don't want to I think they overachieved a little bit, and I think their front offices and ownership just went in too fast. And
Yeah.
sometimes you can do that, but I mean, Minnesota's got to figure out something because Edwards is too good, to kind of just be wasting away on, what's essentially a middling team. They got
Yeah.
to figure out something because again, when he's right, I mean, he is one of the most exciting players in the league, and given his age, right? What is he, 21 or
Literally
something like that?
21. I think
Exactly. I
he's,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
on the dot.
exactly. He just became old enough to drink. So I mean,
Yeah.
when you got a guy that good, that young, I mean, you got to figure out something,
Yeah.
you know, real to build around that because that's just not good enough.
And like, I think a lot of teams nowadays, I feel like they're probably going to get a little bit more hesitant, like you said, with these big trades for these players, all these picks and whatnot. But like, these front offices got to stop like almost overrating some of these guys. Like you would think, like, I think what the mindset was with the Gobert thing is like they thought he was going to be a difference maker, but I don't think he was really ever that in Utah. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, he was a pretty good defensive guy, but that doesn't really, it's not like a player that's going to change, your entire roster. Because if you look at the roster, it's not that great in general, like the standouts for me are pretty much Ant Edwards, Mike Conley, and Towns, like,
You got
I,
McDaniel's, but he's not healthy right
yeah,
now, so
yeah,
he's not
him
for
too.
the playoff.
But,
Yeah,
like Torian Prince, I'm not too high on. Austin Rivers used to be good. It's just a bunch of guys that I'm just not too high on in terms of
yeah,
the supporting cast. So it's like, can you really bring in Gobert and expect, the results that they were kind of promising almost, or had in mind? I just don't know. Same thing with Atlanta. You look at the supporting cast; it hasn't really panned out. You can't ask Dejounte Murray to make that big of a difference, and it's not on those guys. It's not their fault. It's
yeah.
on the team for putting those pressures on them and giving us those expectations and feeding us this stuff. Because when these trades happen, you kind of expect them to work out, but then when they don't, it's kind of like you're in a sticky situation because, like you said, now Minnesota's stuck in the mud for a long time, and unfortunately, we could be seeing Anthony Edwards be locked into something like Dame, and like you said, even Luka. I feel like I'm starting to feel sorry for Luka too because it seems like a whole mismanagement, not even just of his career, but of that team. Unfortunately, because they've gone through a rough patch too.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about the offseason. Like, I'm excited for the playoffs and all that because we're in the thick of it, but I'm really
Yeah.
excited for the offseason because I feel like there's going to be some big changes and some moves that need to happen, or else some teams are going to be stuck in a rut.
Yeah, I do think, if Nas Reed and McDaniels were healthy, I think Minnesota would be more competitive.
For sure.
I don't necessarily know if they would win the series, but I think, it may not be, like a 5-game series.
Right.
But regardless, I think Nas Reed is a free agent, so after this season, I think. So it'll be interesting to see if they bring him back.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Dallas situation is scary. I mean,
Yeah,
like
it's rough.
just how they went from the Western Conference Finals to completely out of the play-in is
It's bad.
just
It's
kind of
really
shocking.
bad.
I mean, I didn't necessarily know if they were going to be able to get that far just because of the amount of good teams, but I at least thought they would make the playoffs. I was shocked that they, just down the stretch of the season just couldn't win games. I mean, they were and it wasn't just that they were losing. They were even losing to bad teams. I mean, they lost to Charlotte. I mean, I think in back-to-back games, right? And both of those games weren't really even that competitive. It was a skeleton crew in Charlotte, and Dallas just, with Kyrie and Luca just couldn't do anything. And
Yeah.
again, like, that you messed up with Brunson, should have paid him, right? Because they could have paid him less money per year and he would have stayed, and they didn't. Now he's
I
gone,
still don't
right? And
understand how they let that
yeah,
happen.
exactly. Yeah, now he's gone. Now he's playing great in New York, the best basketball of his career, right? He's, basically leading a team, out of the first round. Whereas, in Dallas, they're, like you said, stuck in the mud, didn't even make the play in, right?
Oh,
You gave up stuff to get Kyrie. That didn't work. Right
oh,
now, you presumably have to pay him. whatever he wants in the offseason, or else you risk letting him walk. I mean, it's it's getting really scary for Dallas, and
Yeah.
I really do wonder what teams like these, like Minnesota, like Dallas, like Atlanta. I just wonder what they do. I mean, they're varying degrees of bad situations, right? But I mean, each one is still bad, and
Yeah.
it just rumor wise, right, with the Trae Young thing in Atlanta, I mean, we could see a lot of turnover. But like you said, we still got a ton of playoff basketball left. So obviously we got to focus on that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about some of these teams as they get eliminated,
Mm-hmm.
but just in general, right? Like,
Yeah.
obviously the main focus right now is playoff basketball.
Yeah. In the off season, we should do like a um scary hours something, for teams that,
Yeah.
are in jeopardy of, being out of contention for a while, considering, what they may lose, or, even teams that have something to gain, it could be like, scary in a good way, like putting the league on notice, something like that. But, like you said, we're here to focus on playoffs. And, I've thoroughly enjoyed these games. I mean, I feel like this has been some really competitive basketball, especially from the Kings and Warriors, man. That series is,
Yeah.
I mean, I look forward to that like every other day. Like that's
Yeah,
the
it
one that I
sucks.
tune into the most.
Yeah, it sucks because we have, only probably 2 or 3 more games
I
left of that.
know.
Yeah, exactly. But
It's
still,
only
it's
going
been
to
a
heat
great.
up though, so I'm hyped.
Exactly. Yeah, well, I guess that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, another long one, right?
Yeah.
As there's been, a number of playoff games in between, the episodes that we have. We try to discuss, each of them, from the different perspectives of both teams. So again, thanks for sticking around, for as long as you can. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. And I guess we'll see you Thursday, or excuse me, Friday.